All right, so I jumped on it just because I said I was going to at 7 o'clock. But we are having some technical difficulties, such as Doc's video isn't working this week for some reason. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to figure out what's going on there. But if not, I think that just might be a little bit easier for Doc because nobody's gonna have to. It's hard to perform something when people are looking at you. So I'm definitely gonna understand if this is something that is gonna be something a little bit easier for him. Oh, and I was wrong because there he is.
Hello. So I figured out what the problem was, and it was stupid, and I don't want to talk about it. So let's just move on.
Making me sweat bullets for literally nothing. Outstanding, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I told you I had technical issues, but that was why I was running late, and it was kind of the same thing. The camera was doing weird things when I was setting up, and I thought I had those fixed, and no, it turns out I actually just made them worse. So let's just move on.
Hey, fair enough.
Yep.
All right, so standard preamble, kind of do our thing, everything, warm it up a little bit, and then I think I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into mine because I am so nervous that if I don't just do it, because you have done things like authors in pubs before.
That's the thing. I've been thinking about that too, because I was getting kind of nervous today too, and I couldn't figure out why. Because I used to do live readings of my stuff every week for like 2 years. Why is this making me nervous? I don't understand. Yeah, but I get you.
For you, probably because it's been so long. For me, it's the wildly understandable. This is the first time ever having done anything like this, so
That's true. Yeah. Yep.
we'll be figuring it out. So, why don't we go ahead? I really should have thought about this beforehand, but probably should. What do you think? A little description over the book, what the story is, and then just right into it?
That is a really good question, because there is value, like the whole no spoilers thing. Maybe don't tell them what it's about. Just jump right into it. But at the same time, there is value in giving people kind of a little heads up as to what they're getting into. So it is very much a half and half thing.
Well, the thing that that webinar that we went to for that writing, or didn't go to, but attended, that's the right word.
Right, yeah.
The webinar that we did, that, the things that they said, do live writing sessions, stream while you're writing your story, like that
That's insane.
that doesn't make any sense. I don't know. Just absolutely not.
The only thing I can think of is I think of it a lot like a babysitter, you know?
Like, huh?
Say for me, okay? Like I have an issue sticking to it. If I got to sit down and write, it is very easy for me to get distracted. It is very easy for me to just kind of not be present.
Some
So
accountability.
if I had a camera on me and I knew that if I had on there writing session, and then if someone jumps on and sees me on my phone playing SimCity instead, I'm gonna get called out. So maybe I'll actually focus on what I'm doing. I can see how that would be helpful for some people.
I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I can see that. I feel like I would get distracted too much. Number one, I would get distracted too much. Number two, I would because while I'm sitting here researching all the different aspects of what I'm writing, I'm talking about it. I work on something and I'm maybe stuck or a sentence doesn't quite work. I sit there and say it out loud. If I did a live writing session, that would be spoiling literally everything I was working on, so that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, well, first of all, two things. One, that means you would probably have one of the most entertaining writing streams out there. I don't know anybody that does that much animation. For me, as a viewer, I'd be sitting there going why would anyone want to sit there and just watch me type? That sounds boring. But it sounds
Right.
like you might actually be putting on a show. Someone might want to tune in for that. But the second thing is that actually does the spoiler thing doesn't seem to bother people nearly as much. I know one of the back in the day when a lot of like web comics were being funded mostly by through Patreon and stuff like that. One of the things that they offered to paid patrons was that they would do a live stream of when they're like drawing and writing the comics. So if you like reached a certain threshold as a patron, you could dial in and live watch them like making the comic. And
okay, so you're on board with me for like trashing the idea of it, but now you're sitting here like literally defending and saying that it's a good idea. So maybe we should.
Well, so here's the thing. I think it's a good idea for you.
Well, that's because a lot of my characters, I jump into their voices, I like try it out, and yeah, that could be a little entertaining, especially for some of my female voices, because the longer my beard gets, I bet some of those feminine voices would be very funny.
Oh, sure, yeah. You'll get clipped a lot, I'm sure, in that regard. But
I don't know if I want that. Especially, okay, no, there is one clip that I actually do need to go back because I never made a short of it, and that like on YouTube, and that was the absolute most dynamite short that probably would have been, is when I did that impression of Corky in what's her actual name? I blank on her name all the time.
Which movie were we doing? Do you remember?
Oh, Bound.
Yeah, not Gina Gershon, but the other one, Jennifer Tilly.
Jennifer Tilly. Okay. That is I don't know why that name is so hard for me to pull out. But no, that one time I did the Jennifer Tilly impression and your response was just, nuh-uh, don't ever, No, that was something that should have been clipped, but it was too early in the show and I wasn't sure.
Well, we do have one like that. I don't know if you remember, because oh no, it was on my mashup. I'm sorry, it wasn't on the clip. It wasn't on any clips. When you gave me footage to make a mashup for TikTok, I clipped one of you doing the Reese Witherspoon impersonation and said, "Don't ever do that again." Like, so we've got
okay.
This might be a running gag. Maybe we should go back and just find and do a montage of every time you've done an impersonation and I've said stop. Like that would
that actually I could see that being pretty funny. All right, so just getting started. My book, we're going to start off with mine and the chapter 1 of mine. And my book is called Ryuki's Way. It is a somewhat modern adaptation of A Journey to the West, a warrior's journey, plain and simple. But it is, well, that's the thing, that whole spoiler. Kind of curious about that. I think I'm just going to have to get into it and see how I want to describe it after a little bit. Plus, you had that guy that you hired to kind of describe the blurb for your book.
Right, yeah.
I think in order to do this right, I should just get some professionals and just actually do it right.
Yeah. It's something, it occurred to me last time we discussed this, like the way to describe it came to my mind, as usual, hours after it mattered to say.
Of course.
Yeah. But it's that the reason why people will love your book after they read it, and the reason why someone will buy your book before they read it, are two completely different things. And folks like you and I are too bogged down in that first thing. We have no idea where to even start with the first one, and this for the second one. And so that's where we need professional help. And so that's exactly. That's exactly what it's for. I guarantee you, every book that you have ever purchased, that you have ever loved, I guarantee you that blurb was not written by the author. 100%. And
there's a lot to say about that, for the fact that we know what we know about the book, but to have somebody else who just sees the story for what it is, there's a lot to be said about that. So, hell, man, before I get nervous, I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it.
Do it, Doug.
All right. And for the image that is up for my book, I have an artist working on it. This is pretty much just concept art. And I am realizing the artist did exactly what I asked her to do. Putting that out there. I didn't realize how wrong I was. I'm just going to say that.
Been there. Boy, have I been there.
So the cover that I wanted, not gonna work, but that is what is up here, so. Oh, God, that looks so terrible. Is what it is. Oh, God, Brad, you have such terrible taste. Hopefully your book is better.
Well.
All right. Oh man, like I said when I texted you earlier, I'm so nervous, man. I'm piddling my panties over here. Whew.
You actually said you were piddling in your pantries, and I thought
that would
about
be
asking,
even more nervous.
Yeah.
Right.
It took me a little while to kind of sit there and go like, oh, autocorrect, and yeah, this is what he meant. And
Well, see, there you go. So nervous, not even like looking at my text before I send them.
Yep.
All right.
No more stalling. Do it.
Here we go. Ryuki's Way by Bradley Hackworth. Chapter 1. The Gift of the Kitsune. Nichinan, Japan. I had finally arrived in Japan, the place that I would have called home had it not been for the shadow of past tragedy, and I was glad it took next to no time before I was summoned to duty. Beneath the overhanging shelter of a cave near the hidden temple, I secured my boat to a jagged rock, ensuring it was concealed from prying eyes. I leapt into the water and found my way to the rocky beach where I caught sight of the many steps leading up to Udo Shrine. The people were kind enough, making an opening for me as I jumped in line to climb the steps of the shrine, pausing just long enough to shake the sand and rocks from my sandals before my ascent. I panicked a little when a kid who saw my katana tucked behind my robe started playing with it, without my realizing. His mom gasped, but then her husband pointed out that because of how I was dressed, I must either be a guard or a performer. And then she smiled and they ignored me. Once I reached the top, I took position a short way from two pillars, one with the statue of a kitsune, the other empty. Standing behind those who had gathered in front of the shrine to share theories over what could have happened to make a guardian disappear, I thought back to Koriko's final words to me as I departed on my warrior's right, worried that I may never see them again. There must never come a time you expose them and steal their ignorance. Koriko had shot out in response to me questioning what would happen if I required help, tears welling in her eyes as she held me tight. We live in this darkness. We die. We exist as we are, so others may live as they do. I thought of her words as the crowd was replaced by another. It kept going that way as the hours passed, turning day to night. I nodded at those who would address me. Fucker.
Sorry. I tried to do it far away. I'm so sorry. Please continue.
I nodded at those who would address me, similarly thinking as that family had that I was standing guard over the remaining statue. It made sense, I suppose, given what I was wearing was wildly different from anyone I saw, with the only exception being the monks who worked the shrine at the time. Grandfather had sent me out with the kimono he once wore, now tailored down to fit me, and fortunate for me as I was sharing the blue and brown color scheme of this shrine. Waiting as the sun crossed the sky, I looked over the statue and wondered if it would attack me when it would be awoken. The jagged teeth held a stone scroll between its jaws. Much like the others, it sat with its front legs proudly holding a head that held a peaceful-looking face, suggesting its nature was intact. As I walked around the stone pillar it sat on, I ran my fingers along the tail, admiring the details of its fur. The crowds were not wrong. It looked strange to see just the one, as they were set to guard in pairs, but I was there to rectify this situation. Eventually, I was left alone with the single guardian statue that rested at the base of Udo Shrine. I took one final look around me before I began my interrogation to see a remaining monk. I bowed to him, long hair falling into my face as I had promised myself a first kill before cutting. I looked up to see through my fallen hair that he was already far off and I had been left to my duties. After turning around and looking behind the statue to once again make sure I was alone, I placed my hand on the scroll in its mouth and took a deep breath. I was very afraid of failing before I even began by having someone catch me waking it up, After what wound up being more time than necessary, I finally decided to begin. Zenko, my name is Miyazaki Ryuki, and I've come to aid in the Kitsune's issue with Yako. To begin with, do you know what caused Yako's corruption? I said, still taking a moment to look for witnesses before I turned back and stared at the stone statue. You heard what I said. You know I'm telling the truth. Enough. I stared at the unmoving effigy for a while, growing embarrassed at the thought that I had accidentally chosen to talk to just a pretty rock instead of the point of contact I was meant to. I looked past the statue and back the way I had come, searching for any others that might be the one I was supposed to meet. Am I lost? You are where you are meant to be. The statue spoke, surprising me when its lavender iris shone through the stone. Relief washed over me as the kitsune shook the rest of its stone-like appearance off, revealing its full glory and truest form. The pale blue fur of the fox-like creature being slightly rustled by the wind as we took each other in. I got distracted by the waving tufts of long fur between her eyes until I reluctantly bowed to the first immortal entity that I would ever come to know. Lifting my head, I spit my hair out of the side of my mouth. Something that had become so much of a habit, I stopped realizing I was doing it until others pointed it out. I had offended many on my journey here. The Nagitsune must not be allowed to grow, young one. Her pleasantly calming voice was not enough to prevent me from wincing at it speaking so familiar with me. I meant no offense. You are much younger than one who tracks beings such as Yako should be. Your obvious lack of experience has me fearful for you and of your failure. Zenko's white facial markings that you could call eyebrows and whiskers sunk as she held a grim expression that I could clearly see. Her lavender eyes were remarkably expressive, even though basically a fox. But there was no point in denying that those wise eyes were seeing the truth. I looked down and got lost in staring at the way her blue fur faded to white paws, thinking about how I shouldn't be there. This task was set to be another's for a still significant amount of time, but both warriors designated for this region had been killed, one quite recently, forcing grandfather's hand and releasing me into the world. I had no issue with it, since as long as I held the capability of goals, mine was to avenge the death of my mother, one of the warriors meant to be here now. I do apologize, as this task for the kitsune is my first, I said, watching Zenko sigh with disappointment and concern. Yet there's no one left but me. I give you my word. Everything I do is for the sake of my own, and I will not let them down. Once more, Zenko's wise eyes examined me, seeing only the truth. Very well, young warrior. Zenko bowed her head in acknowledgement of my words. However, your bravado does not increase your chances of success in my eyes, yet steadily decreases them. Therefore, I will join you for now. I understand. Which way? I asked. Condescension from a fancy fox really didn't sit well with me. But if it got me to my kill that much quicker, then I didn't see the point in protesting. I'll follow you until you say otherwise. Your manners are appreciated, she said with a polite smile on her face as she hopped down from her stone pillar, the tuft between her eyes bouncing as she landed, walked past and inviting me to follow. But you may be open with me, as I can sense how you truly feel. Show me where Yako roams. I hesitated for a moment before deciding she was correct and I need not hide my true feelings. Leave, and don't watch me kill your friend. I see, she said, half turning her head to look at me, but seemingly deciding against it as she returned her gaze forward. It will not be long. I regretted saying it like that, as this creature had yet to do anything to offend me. In fact, her presence was so overly welcoming that it felt like I was walking with an old friend, and I tried to fight it. I had spent many years imagining slaying everything like her I could find, but she was giving me no reasons. Instead, I was resentfully basking in the warmth of her presence. Over the next hour, and as we crept deeper into a forest made mostly of cedar and cypress, but with a few ginkgo trees as well, I thought about the lessons I had been taught in preparation of departure. She wasn't the one who was causing the damage, and the only reason I treated her that way is because of what she was. Both Koriko and grandfather had warned me of my ever-growing hatred spreading to the allies of our clan. And just as I was about to apologize, she spoke up with a deep concern evident in her voice. "It knows you are here," she said, ceasing her movement forward before turning towards me. "This is where I leave you to your duties." "Thank you," and I attempted to apologize to Zenko, but she launched herself into the sky, disappearing as I lost sight of her between me and that night's near full moon. "Please accept my apology." My words may have been lost on her who hid in the night sky. My attention was then ripped to the ground by the cracking sounds of trees being torn down. My stomach churned at the weight of the bloodlust that fell upon the air. I could hear the silence growing around me as all sounds of wildlife ran from the approaching beast, and for a moment, the world grew so silent that all I could hear was the growing pounding of my heartbeat in my own ears. I flung open the left side of my robe to reveal grandfather's katana tucked tightly to my side, crouched to the ground, and did my best to silently unsheath the blade. Even with the help from the brightly shining moon, I saw no sign of the creature I knew to be near, but I could hear the approaching steps of what would be my initial adversary. "Behind!" I leapt out of the way, avoiding a swipe that brought a large ginkgo tree to the ground, bouncing off another in the dark, and caught my footing as my jaw dropped. The creature was far larger than I was expecting. It held the appearance of a feral fox, but was the size of an elephant. Drool was flowing from its mouth like a stream. It was clearly angered that stalking its prey didn't work out. I started to lose composure as it crouched down, baring its enormous teeth, clearly readying itself for attack. I shakily did the same. "Come on, then," I said, the released rage spreading across me, replacing the fear that had instinctually come. The two of us rushed one another, Yako closing the gap much faster than I. In the final moment, it lifted its head, opened its mouth, and came down on me. I grabbed a knot in the bark of a ginkgo, stopping my movement, narrowly missing its teeth by not enough. I slashed my sword across its face and fought back again, celebrating as I watched the blood spatter the forest floor, causing it to run and recollect itself. As I was retreating, I saw it had two tails bouncing behind it and tried not to wonder why the other one only had one. Focus. I reached into my belt, pulling out some of the prepared spell bombs from Koriko, and tried to sort through the 6 pouches as quickly as possible, but was struggling to remember which one did what. I thought this was going to be simple and maybe melancholic, like putting down a pet, but I was gripping the hilt of my blade with panic at how wrong I was. Also at the idea that I would be killed before I was even able to accomplish my first task. The creature approached me, losing the ferocity worn across its face as it transitioned into the form of a familiar human woman. "No," I whimpered. "My mother?" I watched in horror as my deceased mother approached me with her arms spread wide, welcoming me. I would not fall for this, as it was incredibly clear what had just happened, but still. My heart would not allow me to lift the blade to attack or make any preparations to defend myself. After all these years, I had been given the chance to look upon her face once more, and, as deadly as I knew it to be, I had to steal every last moment of it that I could. "Ryuki, come." The beautifully welcoming voice of my mother sang as she approached me with what I could swear was the love I remembered. Losing myself, I opened my hands to embrace her, and all 6 bags fell to the ground, causing an explosion that sent both myself and Yako flying back. Yako was now wearing injuries as well as the face of my mother, breaking me from my foolishness. Rage and shame replaced the moment of peace I had been lost in as I picked myself and the katana up from the ground, now showing intense signs of damage on both of us as well. I limped towards the beast who wore her face. Those spells weren't supposed to negatively affect me, yet the mixture of them going off together must have done something more. But it didn't matter. I would finish at least this one job. I gripped the katana with both hands and listened as the tip of the blade scraped along the rocks and hard forest floor. Ryuki, why would you? The beast attempted to plead, but I would give it no more chances. Enough! I shouted as I raised the blade high above my head. You will not continue this dishonor. Remove the mask of she who you wear. My hands couldn't do it. I remained frozen as the creature healed its face and my mother's was once again whole. She started crying and her tears fell hard. Somehow, it let blood surround itself and presented me with the final horrific memory I actually had of my mother. I fell backwards as the eyes I was looking through no longer belonged to what Zenko referred to as a young warrior's, but had become those of a small child watching his beloved mother's final moments. I'm so sorry, I let out, slowly lowering the blade, lost in a living memory. It was my fault. Yes, it was, but we can remedy that now, she said, reaching out to me. Together. As she continued reaching towards me, her fingertips extended into pointed blades that seemed as though they were made of a metal that she was lovingly going to thrust through my heart. I didn't care, as I could finally be reunited with her. But our reunion was halted by the moon's light all of a sudden shining so brightly it was as if we were midday. The disguise of my mother had completely vanished under the light the other kitsune shone upon us. In a moment of clarity, I brought the blade down as quickly and decisively as I could on the corrupted creature's head. I followed up with a stab through its heart and then fell to the ground. No more! I screamed with fury in an attempt to hide my pain, but it must have been all too obvious to my audience of one who shone the spotlight upon me, its moonlight reflecting on what had become the tear-stained face of a child. The bright moonlight faded as I stole what I thought would be one final look at the shameful form Yako had taken. Goodbye again, beloved mother. After we were left in total darkness, I picked the creature up and began our journey back to the shrine, praying it would release the form of my mother, but it never did. The walk lasted far too long as I carried her in my arms, doing everything I could to resist holding her as though she were really my fallen mother. But I did not have the willpower to hold the tears or the memories at bay. I thought of the times we played with Kendama, and the happiness that was always reflected in the joy she would show every time I succeeded. The beautiful smile that she wore across her face in every memory I held of her. Her sing-song laugh that would make me bubble each time it was me that made it happen. There was no moment I could think of as I carried the remains back to the shrine that wasn't of a woman filled with love and happiness. None but the last. Walking up the steps of the shrine, I saw that Zenko had dropped out of the sky and was now waiting for me on the same pillar she was resting upon when we met earlier that evening. I assumed she had been there since I had been left in the darkness. Her expression turned to a mixture of shock and anger as we approached. Please put him down, she desperately demanded. I will release this. I did as she requested and gently set what she referred to as him, but looked like my mother down on the ground. She placed her paws on my mother's chest and softly howled a deep resonating sound that I could feel travel through my bones. It seemed as though I was not alone in this, as the skin of the corpse shook itself back into fur. Very quickly my mother's face faded into a fox's, and I was left staring at the remains of Yako. Thank you. I was thankful, but also very angry as Zenko had all but stolen my first kill, and my warrior's rite would not be completed until I had succeeded in 5 battles. But I must ask, why would you help me? As shameful as it is, I may not have survived without your assistance, and your friend could have endured. Taking the form of your mother was too far, she confessed. I saw the effect it had on you and realized in that moment what would happen. What you said previously, there was no one left but me, made the risk far too great. Therefore, I revealed his true form to you. Zanko took a moment to look down at her deceased companion, and I watched her succumb to her sadness. Tears filled her lavender eyes as she wept. I was completely shook as I stood there, fighting the empathy I did not want to give this creature. I had never once in my life truly considered the aftermath, or the collateral damage that may be left in my wake. "My friend was lost before I ever laid eyes upon you, young warrior," she said, having once again regained her composure. "Please accept my gratitude for bringing a finality to his torment." She bowed her head to me once again, letting the tuft of hair between her eyes fall like my long hair had done. In spite of everything I wanted to feel, I returned her bow, and we remained that way for a long while, neither one of us sure as to who should rise first. Eventually, I watched her eyes fall on my damaged sword and linger for a while, before lifting her head to speak. "There may be another way for both of us to continue to show our gratitude," she said, staring at the damaged katana my grandfather had used for decades. "Would you follow me?" Sure," I said, curious about what she may have meant by both of them. "Zanko, who else do you refer when you say us?" She furrowed her brow, and as she turned to walk up the stairs to the top of the shrine, passing through the vermilion torii gates and remaining silent as we climbed the steps, I followed with Yako in my arms, carrying him with much more ease since Zanko's shedding of his disguise. Now just the body of a red-brown fox. Once I arrived at the top of the stairs, she was waiting, motioning for me to set him down on a stone slab. "Yako is the one in which I reference," she said, watching me closely as I laid his body down. "He was not the one you fought this night. He was lost when struck by the yokai Mikasa, and if his mind was still intact, he would wish for this as well." "What would he wish for?" I asked. I had hoped that by my asking she would not go deeper into an explanation over what she meant when she said yokai Mikasa, as even though this creature had gained my sympathy and some of my respect, I still did not want to endure a lesson from it. It's this region's way of saying corruption and nothing more. Thankfully, she complied. "In place of the weapon he robbed you of." She broke eye contact to look at the cracked katana she was referencing. "And with your permission, I will weaponize the remains of Yako if you so choose. His service may continue until such a time may come that you deem his honor has been restored." "And when that day comes?" I asked, running my fingers over the crack in the blade, wondering how furious Grandfather might be if he survives long enough for me to return it to him. "Then I ask that you return, here and together." She returned her gaze to meet mine. "We will lay him to rest." "Show me," I said, accepting her offer, though you must understand my hesitation to use it. "I believe I understand," she gave back to me. "I am grateful for your willingness to accept the option. Place your sword hand here." Zanko motioned that I lay my hand on the dead chest of Yako, and so I did, feeling the still warm remains resist my palm. She placed her paw over the top of my hand, howled a very similar yet lower-pitched resonance, like she did to release his form. I felt my bones. Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
A lot of words.
I think mine's going to be more.
Good. I don't have to feel so bad.
Yeah.
All right. I felt my bones vibrating, and the heat crawled up my spine as I was accepted through the hide. "Now turn your hand over, palm up, please," she said, speaking with the same resonance she had just been howling with. I was stunned by her manners for a moment, but I snapped myself out of it and did as she requested. While turning my hand over, I saw and felt the remains clinging to my skin, as though the fur didn't wish to let go, but it adjusted itself with my movements and settled on the back of my wrist, feeling like my skin was being manipulated by the legs of thousands of tiny insects. The bones shrunk as they burrowed into my skin. Using her paw, she pulled me further up, and Yako's skull opened to engulf the lower part of my right arm, leaving me looking as though I'd been left with a skull-covered clubbed hand. "Zanko!" I said in a panic, realizing I should have asked for more information before we began. Where's my hand? Is this my new hand? What have I? Clench your fist and think of your sword, she said, barely suppressing a giggle. I did as she commanded and watched as the fur leapt into my palm and the bones nestled as armor on the back of my hand. The fur filled my grip, and to the greatest of my relief, I saw my hand holding a katana. I breathed a heavy sigh as the panic faded, turning into fascination at what had transpired within my grasp. I released my grip and was left with a very small version of Yako's skull covering the back of my hand, and the reddish-brown fur growing out of my wrist. Why is it so small? I asked, picturing Yako when he was big enough to topple trees. All you need is to will it to change, she replied. There is nothing more. If there truly is nothing more, I said, peeling the skull off my hand and tucking the newly created weapon into my pocket, then it's time I move on. One final time, just as we had done at our first meeting, Zenko and I bowed to one another and I moved to exit the shrine. It was still a few hours from dawn, but as I descended the staircase back to my boat, I thought how long yesterday's sunset felt from then. My overconfidence was nearly my downfall, and without the aid of Zenko, I would not have survived. The weight of Grandfather and Kariko's worries began to settle deeper within me. Walking across the sand and rocks yielded the same result as when I first arrived. Sitting down in the rocking boat, I took my sandals off, brushed them clean, and began untying from the rock. I stole a final glance at the top of Udo's shrine to see Zenko looking down upon me, but it was too far away to tell if she had returned to her stone form or not. I rose and kept looking at her as the small boat was carried away from the shore, and as she fell from sight, I took the remains of Yako out from my robe to examine more closely. What do I call you, I wonder? I asked the corpse in my hand. I sat down, grabbed the oars, and began rowing north. Now that my first task had been technically completed, I would need to send message to find out if I'm needed here or if it's time for transport elsewhere. Yako's Wrath? I asked the skull sitting in the seat opposite of me. Yako's Veil. Wraith Skin. Phantom Pelt? I'm not very good at this, am I? I looked at the skull, waiting for a response, but it insisted on giving me the silent treatment. I was already bored and still not used to being alone. I felt the want to tell Koriko about what I had just done and have a meal in celebration of my accomplishment, or even be scolded by Grandfather about my inability to accomplish my task alone. Foxfire Blade! I shouted at it. Ugh. Never mind. I continued rowing north in silence. And that's chapter 1 of Ryuki's Way.
Applause, applause, applause. Yay.
Not half as nerve-breaking as I was thinking it was going to be. Once I got into it, kind of forgot there were people watching.
Right, exactly. That does happen, yeah. It's a little bit different. It's weirdly the opposite with the live audience, is that, you get to hear reactions, they laugh at lines and you get to go like, oh, okay, this works, and it kind of fuels you a little further. So you would think having the live audience would be more nerve-wracking. It actually it's weirdly comforting.
I would imagine it could be comforting if it's succeeding. If you have jokes and nobody laughs, I cannot imagine that being comforting.
No, I don't know. It's not great. It's helpful though, because it's one of those things where you're like, okay, that one didn't like and that was kind of one of those like I kind of learned a few because I've got friends who also do stand-up comedy. I did kind of like learn from there of how to recover a bad joke. Like I remember I did one piece where I was taught where it was a essay more of a story than it was more of an essay than a story, and it basically was talking about people who take naked pictures of themselves in the mirror and stuff like that was basically like the subject matter. And and I even said in there about how like is this the kind of why is this appeal to us? because, and I'm like, because maybe it displays just the right amount of poor decision making to suggest they might date me. And that joke did not land. It did not land.
What?
The audience was quiet. However, when I realized what I said and that I had my girlfriend in the audience right there, I turned to her and went, "Sorry, sweetie." And that got a laugh.
Oh, yeah, the awkwardness definitely would receive the laugh more. I could easily see that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know if I'm brave enough to actually say this or not, but hell, might as well. What did you think about chapter 1?
Oh, you're asking me that. Here's the interesting thing, because I read it before. I have been reading through your book, and I even read some of it this morning.
Yay!
And we've had a couple of discussions before, and you mentioned that some of the feedback I was giving you had also heard from your other beta readers as far as that goes. I had a bit of a revelation just now as you were reading it, and I think I put my finger on what it was. Your book is very good for reading out loud. The difficult.
What? Whoa, where'd you go? What? That is about the funniest time for Doc to accidentally get booted. That was great.
You're not getting away from this that easy. All right.
No, I was like, hey, no, we had a compliment. Done. All right, go ahead. You're saying
no, but yeah, no. The point is that like when you said, like I was saying, it's kind of heavy. It's there's nothing technically wrong with the language that you use there. It takes some time to follow. It kind of like there's a lot of having to reread bits in order to really get what's being said there. That is not an issue with you reading it aloud because you're giving inflection, you're putting pauses. This is a very good narration. It's a little difficult if you're on your own reading it. If you're just reading it without any like audio cues, without knowing where you're supposed to pause or change your tone or whatever like that, if you're leaving it up to the reader to figure that out on their own, it makes it a little bit more difficult to interpret. And
I kind of figure the audiobook is probably where this is going to succeed a little bit more.
Probably. It's possible. Yeah. I don't know. I was actually just I was wondering about that, like how, like, because I know, like, definitely in my circles, the circles that I run in, audiobooks are the king because we're all working 80-hour weeks, and so if we want to read a book, we got to like listen to audiobooks while we're working.
That or you can spend the next 3 years falling asleep to one page every day.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's how that works for me. If I want to fall asleep, I just got to read.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, no, apparently according to some of the sales figures I just looked up, print books still wipe everybody else out altogether.
Really?
Like, yeah. Well,
hold up. That makes a lot of sense though. Print books are more expensive than audiobooks.
They didn't say by sales dollar amounts. They said by like sales like item numbers.
Crazy. I would not have
People
thought
just
that.
by volume are buying more print books than they are ebooks or audiobooks.
Here's what I'm gonna say this. Here's what I bet more people are buying audiobooks or opposite. Buying the physical copies. I bet more people are actually finishing the audiobooks.
No, you're probably not wrong there. You're probably there's probably something to that. I think there's also a certain degree because like we're hearing pushback. I've talked about it, and I'm not the only one about how we can't own movies anymore. Everyone's everything's on a streaming library. Everyone wants their DVDs back. We had our DVD library. We don't like paying the purchase price for a movie on Amazon only to have Amazon lose their licensing right and it's gone forever. It's like we paid for it, we bought it. Why is it gone? Because you know. And so I think there's probably a lot of people who are buying the physical books just so that they don't have to deal with that, because that is an issue. Even on Audible, like Audible, your library will come and go based on whether or not they have the license to the book you bought.
I gotta jump in because there's something that I do not want to forget about this. There is something about buying movies on Amazon that is absolutely horrible. Horrible. You can't get them out of your library. The first like 5 movies that are on my Amazon are not
Yeah.
movies I like. They're movies I specifically don't like. But an ex that I dated bought them on my Amazon, and I cannot get rid of them. So I
Oh
literally
yeah.
ever it is the I, okay.
Yeah.
That is all I wanted to say
No,
about that.
I totally get what you're talking about because like that happened to me with Google actually. The first ever Google tablet I bought when they were
Yeah.
selling it, they were like, and you get a free like YouTube digital free copy of Transformers: Dark Side of the Moon, and I'm like, I give zero shits about that, but this is the
Yeah.
tablet I want, so I'm buying it. And then every time I went for like the next 2 years, every time I went on YouTube, I would see my like suggested videos, and they would all say on there like, because you purchased Transformers Dark Side of the Moon. I'd be like, I did no such thing.
That is honestly that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna queue up yours. Are you ready to give chapter 1 of Modus Operandi?
Yes, yes, I think I am.
That's not placed properly.
And
All
shit,
right.
you know what? Do you still have the link from last time, or do I need to send it to you again?
About
So you
what?
can put the link to the to buy it on Amazon. You can put it in the comments while we're streaming here. So
I already got it.
you already got it. That's why I asked. That's why I asked if you needed it again. So let me go ahead and pull it up here.
Now, I got Modus Operandi queued up. The cover is ready to go whenever you're ready to give your chapter 1. Just real quick. For the first part of the video, I did chapter 1 of Ryuki's Way. Second part, we're jumping in for chapter 1 of Modus Operandi, a book written by Jonathan Ems. Written, what, 10 years ago at this point?
12.
12
Well,
years
actually,
ago.
well, 13 years written, and then I kind of, when I first published it, I put it out as a serial online,
Mhm.
and then once I finished that, then it was like a year after I first started putting it out, then I finally published it as a trade paperback kind of thing.
Okay.
There was a whole thing like the online like publishing thing I was using at the time. Like I was putting it out as a serial, and then just as I was about to publish the last book in the serial, they came up and they were like, "Hey, we don't do serials. You gotta take these down and publish a full book." And I'm like, "Bullshit! There's serials all over the place. What the hell is this book?"
No, we don't
Like
do it
you're
for you.
right, exactly, yeah. And you know what? It's been like 8 months. You sure did take your time figuring it out.
Oh, yeah.
But so yeah, and then even then, like it's based off of a like a YouTube series that I wrote the script for. It was supposed to be when I was in China. We were gonna try to produce this series and put it online as like a TV
Right,
series, a
yeah.
short TV series. And so the very first version of it was written like maybe even 5 years before that. So this is like a 20+ year old story, and it's still, I mean, looking back on it, I'm sitting here going like, I'm a better writer now. There's things I do differently, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, it's still, yeah, no, I still like it. I still like it. I don't love it like I used to, but I still like it.
Well, let's hear it.
All right. Modus Operandi, a tech noir mystery that was added like 2 years ago. That part.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. Tech noir mystery. That was as a late edition. Book 1, Not Very Bright. Prologue. The world breathed a sigh of relief when scientists and mathematicians of every nation came to an agreement that the world was not going to end. The massive comet that had been coming straight at us for the better part of a decade was going to just barely miss, affecting the Earth with little more than a spectacular celestial body to observe in the night sky for 2 short nights. This was why, despite foreknowledge of its approach, civilized nations were utterly surprised by the end of the world. Schaeffer's comet had an active isotopic core that would have rewritten existing theories on cold fusion had we ever been given the chance to discover it. As it stands, the electromagnetic waves that pulsed from the comet blanketed the Earth and turned every electronic component on the planet into a melted lump of slag. It wouldn't have covered so much ground had the Earth not been revolving. Every wire, every battery, every generator, every cable, every single bit of metal or composite material that had the slightest electric charge burst into a shower of sparks and flame and caved in upon itself, fusing to its surroundings. For the first time in over a century, the entire first world infrastructure stopped working. Other than that, not much has changed. Harvard Wilcox was just barely old enough to remember when the blackout happened. Oh, sorry. Now we are on to book one. That was the prologue. Book one. Not very bright. Harvard Wilcox was just barely old enough to remember when the blackout happened. At this moment, however, he doesn't remember anything at all. It wasn't like you see in the movies where the amnesiac super spy wakes up face down in an alley with no recollection of how he got there. Rather, Harvard was comfortably leaning against the wall in the alley when it suddenly occurred to him that he had no recollection of how he got there. It was the strangest feeling he'd ever experienced, as far as he knew. Don't panic, Harvard thought, just think for a minute and try to remember how you got here. Looking around, Harvard saw that he was not in an unpopulated area. The alley was accessible through a guarded roadblock at one end and the brick facade of a skyscraper on the other. In between was a microcosm of a community for the residents who lived in the surrounding buildings. Iron safety gates that were meant to block access to the residential flats were made virtually useless by the people who left them wide open when lackadaisically passing between buildings. Wide industrial doors opened on the garage storage spaces in which residents kept their motor vehicles, tools for their trade, or in some cases, their children. One of them housed a small convenience store that seemed to have given up on any semblance of grocery and offered little more than the world's most extensive collection of artificial cheese-flavored snacks. Some of the older residents would pass the time sitting on makeshift stools just outside their doors, fanning themselves from the heat and waiting for something interesting to happen. They'd decided that Harvard was that something interesting. Not a single thing about this alleyway was the least bit familiar to Harvard. Okay, he finally thought, maybe I should panic. One of the most interesting things about amnesia is how it reveals the way our brain separates memories from knowledge. For instance, Harvard had no memory of his entire life from before that moment, but he knew that this meant he had amnesia and that the most likely culprit of this was a head injury. So, with great care, he ran his fingers over his head, gently searching for anything that revealed pain. Nothing. No splits or lumps of any evidence of a recent blow to the noggin. The next obvious culprit would be trauma. Looking down at himself, Harvard saw no evidence of injury anywhere on his person. There were no tears or cuts in his clothes, no spatters or stains of blood. He was clean. He scanned the alleyway community once more. The quiet little neighborhood showed no sign that anything of significance had happened there other than his own peculiar behavior. When completely free of reference, no memory of precedent, and no experience to draw from, it might seem like the idea to search one's own pockets would come from out of nowhere. That is what Harvard did next, hoping to find some clue as to who he was and how he'd come to this condition. The answer came in the form of a small pharmaceutical box in his coat pocket. The front of the box featured an overly enthusiastic model with a broad smile and both thumbs thrust upward in an approving manner. Amnitol, it said in large blue letters, just over the inviting slogan, "Take a vacation from yourself." Amnitol? Harvard stared at the little box in disbelief. What kind of idiot drops amnitol in the middle of the street? Inside the box, Harvard found the palm-sized card that was legally required for all medication. It was a simple liquid crystal card that merely displayed the words, "Place them here," just above a dark red oval. Following the instructions, Harvard gripped the card with his left thumb over the oval. As prompted, the words "place thumb here" changed to "scanning" as a friendly electronic chime played out of the card's tiny speakers. Waiting for the diagnosis, Harvard took a moment to look around him again. The inhabitants of the alleyway continued to stare at him blankly. They showed no sign of threat, nor any sign of being threatened by him. They regarded him as little more than their unexpected entertainment for the day. A single beep informed Harvard that the scan was complete, and the card politely informed him, "Dosage confirmed. It was official. He was the idiot who took Amnitol in the middle of the street. The red oval faded away and was replaced with the grinning face of the same model that graced the front of the box. She excitedly greeted Harvard with an inappropriately enthusiastic, "Thank you for choosing Amnitol, the only targeted axon blocker with a 5-star safety rating. For your convenience and the convenience of others, we have included a complimentary Amnitol lapel pin so that those around you may be aware of your current condition." Prompted by that, Carver dug into the Amnitol box, searching for his pin. It wasn't there. The annoyingly cheerful spokesmodel continued with her presentation as he rifled through his pockets. "Our scan shows that you have taken a 300 milligram dosage, which, for your weight and body type, should result in a 48 to 50-hour effect time. Should your amnesia last any longer than 50 hours, go immediately to the nearest emergency neurological facility." Harvard found the pin in his inside coat pocket. It had already been removed from its wrapping and had been attached to a small piece of paper that simply read, "Don't wear the pin. You have no friends. Signed, you." Harvard stared at the ridiculous note to himself as the muffled voice of the spokesmodel droned on from inside his pocket. Common side effects include, but are not limited to, headache, nausea, dry mouth, some facial muscle tension, and in some rare cases, death has occurred. Enjoy your vacation and thanks again for choosing Amnitol. After coming to terms with the fact that he might be mentally challenged, it finally occurred to Harvard to check for a wallet. He found one in the most cliche of locations, his back pants pocket. It was almost as if he wanted to be robbed. The wallet contained his government issue ident card, and was then that Harvard received his second shock. His name was Harvard. My parents must have been assholes, he thought. Jesus, I hope I'm not an asshole. The wallet also contained the obligatory photographs of loved ones. It didn't take long for Harvard to ascertain that the older people in the pictures were his asshole parents, but the rest of them could be anybody. Brothers, sisters, cousins. The note said Harvard had no friends, so there was a slight chance that these pictures actually came with the wallet. There was really no way for Harvard to know for sure. Placing the wallet back into his back pocket, he checked his other pockets for any other clues. The only other item was a business card from a place called Fast Track. From the look of the flashing red letters that displayed the establishment's name, Harvard could only assume it was as seedy a club as one could find. "Okay, my name is Harvard," Harvard finally said out loud. "I'm an asshole and I go to cheap strip clubs." Saying it out loud did not make it any more real. The looping animation on the Fast Track card changed to display the lineup of their featured dancers, a parade of stick-thin, top-heavy debutantes. What was shocking to Harvard was that one of them looked familiar. Starlight was the name displayed over her as she twirled around in a cartoonishly revealing outfit. Harvard was less interested in her physique as he was the idea of actually recognizing someone while on an Amnitol trip. It finally occurred to him that he recognized her because he had just seen her moments ago in his own wallet. It's amazing how easy it is to remember a face when your grand total of faces seen has been reduced to a single digit. Opening up his wallet again, he found the picture he was looking for. The girl he now knew only as Starlight was looking back at him with a warm and friendly smile as she held hands with some guy with his own stupid smile on his face. It took a moment for Harvard to realize that the man in the photo with Starlight was him. "My name is Harvard," he said out loud again. "I have no friends and I date a stripper. Or I used to anyway, and I'm the kind of idiot who takes Amnitol in the middle of the street." Saying it out loud didn't help at all. It still seemed completely ridiculous. He looked over the card and watched as Starlight appeared and looped through her routine again. What kind of man am I? Harvard asked himself. Am I the kind of guy who's going to just enjoy his vacation, or am I the kind of idiot who would waste it searching for answers? The advert looped through once again, and Harvard watched Starlight shimmy and twirl again. "I think," he finally said proudly, the quietly watching neighborhood, "I'm the kind of guy who likes to watch girls take their clothes off." And with that, he turned towards the mouth of the alley and made his way to the main street. "Hey!" Harvard stopped cold. He'd only just begun to walk around the barrier at the end of the alley when the voice called out sharply. Behind him, he could hear the snickers and sighs of the residents watching his confusion. Looking around for the source of the voice, Harvard found the small booth at the end of the barrier. Inside, a uniformed and sour looking man who seemed to barely fit inside the plexiglass frame of the station was holding a microphone with as much outward indignation as one can display when otherwise immobile. Can't you read? The guardsman said, seeming truly offended by something Harvard had apparently overlooked. I'm sorry, Harvard said. The sign, buddy, the guardsman said, pointing downward. Harvard dropped his gaze to just below the booth window. A yellow sign was stapled to the side of the booth reading Toll $1. Toll $1, the guardsman continued. That's what the sign has said for the last 5 years. I'm pretty sure that's what it says now. Don't make me come out there to check. It's hot out there, and this uniform chafes when I sweat. I've got a nice air conditioner in here, and if I have to open this door and let all my cool air out just to walk around there and check my sign, it'll pretty much ruin my afternoon. You don't want to ruin my afternoon, do you? Harvard blinked in disbelief as barely audible chuckles and snickers from the observing residents faded in and out around him. No, of course not, Harvard said. It's just, I'm not in a car. I'm walking. This seemed to elicit outright laughter from the spectators. Does the sign say anything about cars? The guardsman responded, seeming even more hurt than before at the instigation. The sign says toll $1. If that in some way implies that cheapskates like yourself that don't bother to get a car are in some way above the rules, then perhaps we need to reconsider the plasticity of our language. It's not that I'm a stickler for details, mind you. I just can't help but wonder what it is you've done in your life that makes you think it's okay for you to just walk past my checkpoint without paying the toll. Did you cure cancer? Have you saved the lives of impoverished children in Africa? What deed have you done that earned you the right to take food from my family's table? Okay, Harvard finally broke in. I'll pay the dollar. No need to question my integrity. As he made his way across the checkpoint, he began to wonder if he actually did have integrity. The guardsman waited patiently as Harvard flipped through the bills in his wallet. With a labored sigh, Harvard finally asked, "Can you break 100? Break 100, the guardsman responded. Sure, let me just go downstairs to the safe. No, I can't break 100. I haven't been able to break 100 for 5 years. The day they brought me the sign that says toll $1, I told them to bring me another sign that says exact change only. That was 5 years ago. I tell you, if it weren't for the really good air conditioner I've got in here, I'd tell them to take this job and shove it. Right, okay, fine, Harvard said. It would have been easier to just climb over the buildings. Do you know where I can get some change? What am I, a tour guide? Haven't you heard a word I said? I've spent the last 5 years inside this box. I'd never leave. It's hot out there, and this uniform chafes when I sweat. Harvard, not knowing if he'd ever been a patient man, lost his patience and turned his back on the guard. He remembered seeing something passing for a snack shop in the alleyway and headed towards it. Hey, where are you going? The guardsman called after him. Don't be angry. It's not my fault. We're all just doing the best we can with what we have. The guffaws and cackles of the resident spectators echoed around them both as Harvard walked away. It takes a special kind of entrepreneur to open up shop out of a garage and forsake any semblance of professional aesthetics. The squat little man behind the counter of this grungy little snack shop was just such a person. Dust had settled over most of the inventory, and the refrigerators containing perishable items didn't appear to have ever been connected to any kind of power source. The shopkeeper himself paid no notice to the flies buzzing in a halo around his head as his focus was held firmly by the television mounted to the ceiling of the garage. Authorities are still denying emergency crews access to the disaster zone, the news reporter droned on from the TV. Can you break 100? Harvard asked, not waiting for the shopkeeper to take notice of him. The lack of information concerning the cause of the event makes it unsafe for any response other than military, the TV voice continued. You'll have to buy something, the shopkeeper said, not looking away from the TV. Harvard nodded silently to himself. He should have expected that. He began looking around the store for something that looked like it might be even remotely edible as the voice on the TV continued with its report. It has been over 3 weeks since the destruction of Commercial District 17, with over 1,500 people reported missing. If anyone had survived the initial event, there is little hope they are still alive today. Harvard had found a packet of peanuts that didn't seem to have very much mold in it and a warm can of soda pop. Looking over the unfamiliar characters on the packaging, it occurred to him that the shopkeeper had not spoken to him in English. The shop sold Chinese packaged items, and the shopkeeper had spoken to Harvard in Mandarin. Yet Harvard had understood him perfectly. I speak Chinese? Harvard thought in disbelief. Looking down at the undecipherable jargon on the packaging, however, it seemed that he couldn't read it. I hope that makes sense in 50 hours. Harvard placed the items on the counter along with his $100 bill. As the shopkeeper counted out his change, Harvard looked up the TV and saw footage of the disaster they had been speaking of earlier. Whole city blocks had been reduced to rubble. Uniformed soldiers climbed over the debris with odd-looking instruments, checking for any clues as to what happened here. What happened? Harvard asked the shopkeeper, surprising himself as the words came out in perfect Mandarin with a southeastern dialect. The shopkeeper looked at Harvard with a scowl. Where the hell have you been? He responded. Stuck in this forsaken shithole with no memory of how I got here, was the response that first came to Harvard's mind. Thankfully, the time it took him to remember the Mandarin word for shithole allowed him to rethink the diplomacy of the matter. Harvard scooped up his change and left the shop, leaving the soda pop and peanuts behind. Harvard climbed out of the taxi and looked across the street at the Fast Track Gentlemen's Club. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Harvard recognized the architecture of having once belonged to a prominent fast food chain. The walls were covered in enough grime and traffic exhaust stains, it seemed clear that nobody had bothered to so much as rinse the place off since it had changed hands. A massive sign rose above its roof, alerting drivers that we have power 24/7. It was the immutable curse of the adult entertainment industry. No matter the luxury inside, it was practically required by law to look as much like a dump as possible on the outside. Harvard halted a bit before crossing the street to the entrance. There was a nagging feeling in his gut. It was similar to what most people would call butterflies if the butterflies in question were more angry than afraid, and also armed. Harvard paid it no mind. He was determined to find out who Starlight was, and the spokesmodel did say that nausea was a common side effect of Amnitol. He gulped down the feeling, marched across the street, and entered the club with as much confidence as he could muster. The sign just inside the door stated that Harvard was just in time to avoid a cover charge, so he headed directly for the main room. Hold it, a voice said from behind him. Why does this keep happening to me? Harvard thought as he turned towards the voice. A coat check counter was nearly invisible in the corner of the lobby. Behind it sat a man who was neither young enough to be a coat check or large enough to be security. Hand it over, the old man said. Harvard blinked at this. Hand what over? The doorman gripped the computer screen that faced him and swung it around so that Harvard could see it. It displayed a run-of-the-mill security scanner that showed a basic wireframe of a man with a highlighted wireframe of a pistol resting against his back hip. Harvard's mouth dropped open. That can't be me, he thought. We don't get too many toters around here, the doorman said, but we know how to handle you. You're not going to make any friends by breaking the rules. There must be some mistake, Harvard's mind insisted as he carefully reached into his coat and around his back. His fingers closed around the grip of the gun and his heart stopped. Son of a bitch, I'm a toter? Ever so gently, he pulled the weapon from its holster and brought it into view. It was a nickel-plated, lovingly polished 9mm hand cannon. I'm a toter and my name is Harvard. I must be an asshole. Sorry, I forgot I had it on me, Harvard said to the doorman as he carefully handed the gun to him. Oh yeah, the doorman responded, placing the weapon in a very complicated-looking lockbox. I've heard about those new holsters. Damn things should be illegal if you ask me. Thumb here. Harvard pressed his thumb against the scanner and the lockbox clicked. Nobody was getting that gun now unless everyone was okay with it. Enjoy the show, the doorman finally said, and immediately began ignoring Harvard with all the skill and grace of a professional. There is an interesting paradox in every gentleman's club, one which they share with almost every bar, dance club, and even some coffee shops. They will spend ungodly amounts of money to make their club as poorly lit as possible. Dozens of industrial-grade lights, each able to burn with the candle power of the sun itself, are mounted on the ceiling, covered with red or blue filters, set to 1/10 power, and pointed at a far corner of the room that nobody would ever want to look at. The result is an ambient haze of just barely visible everywhere other than the stage, where the lights are raised to 3/10 of power, making it seem like a glaringly bright stage that leaves you temporarily blind when you look away. What's even more remarkable is that nobody would ever have it any other way. What can I get for you? The bartenders asked. Beer, Harvard said, without thinking. I guess I like beer. With beer in hand, Harvard looked around the main room of Fast Track, waiting for anything in his brain to tell him why he was here. So far, the only thing that stood out was the naked woman having a simulated love affair with the metal pole bolted to the stage. For a few short moments, Harvard didn't have any questions. He finally turned back to the bartender. Hey, I know this is a strange question, but do you remember me? The bartender cocked his head to one side. Should I? He said. I don't know. Harvard took the Fast Track business card out of his pocket and handed it to the bartender. I found one of your cards in an old coat, but I don't remember coming here before. Just curious, really. The bartender watched the ad loop over the card and shrugged. Couldn't have been that long ago, he finally said. Cheap ass batteries on these things don't last much longer than a month. Plus, I think Starlight's only been here a couple of weeks herself, so no. Sorry, pal, I don't remember seeing you. If you were here, it was on someone else's shift. Right, Harvard said. Starlight working tonight? She's working now, the bartender said. She'll probably be on in a couple of minutes. Cool, thanks, bartender. Harvard took his beer and found an empty table near the stage. The girl on the stage eyed him sharply as he did, possibly measuring up whether or not Harvard was going to be more friendly with his money than the rest of these day drunks. A part of Harvard's brain started to formulate an argument to forget about Starlight and refocus the investigation on whoever the hell this girl was. Harvard was so focused on the girl that he almost missed the chair when sitting down. A light tap on his shoulder snapped Harvard's attention around. Before he realized what he was doing, his hand had closed around the empty space at the small of his back where the pistol would have been had a conscientious citizen not relieved him of it earlier. Poor girl, startled by Harvard's reaction, barely managed to keep from losing her balance on the ridiculously high-heeled shoes she was wearing. Harvard was about to admonish the girl for sneaking up on him when he realized that with the brightly colored uniform she was wearing and the cumbersome tray of cigarettes she was balancing on the aforementioned ridiculous shoes, it was obvious this girl couldn't sneak up on anyone if she tried. Harvard had not only let his guard down, he had downright neglected his surroundings in favor of the pale pink nipples that were hypnotically bouncing about the stage. I should be dead, Harvard thought to himself, which later seemed like a rather harsh self-assessment. I'm sorry, he finally said to the girl. You startled me. Would, she gulped, still shaken and not quite in balance yet. Would you like a cigarette? Harvard looked down at her wares and felt nothing for them. This puzzled him, since it stood to reason that a smoker would feel desire for them and a non-smoker would be revolted by them. Maybe Harvard was reading too much into his gut reactions and just embraced the fact that he knows nothing about himself for the next couple of days. I don't know, he said to the cigarette girl. Do I look like a smoker? She looked around the room, wondering if any of the other patrons would come to her rescue if Harvard suddenly pulled a gun on her. None of them seemed to even notice she was there. Her nipples were covered, so why would they? Um, show me your teeth, she finally said. That was not the response Harvard was expecting, but he complied. He bared his teeth at her in what he hoped was a completely non-threatening way. The cigarette girl leaned forward and squinted a bit, wanting to get a better look without actually getting any closer to him. She finally righted herself and pulled a pack from her tray. You smoke Eldridges. I don't carry those, but I have Cobalts. They contract from the same plantation, so they're really similar. Been doing this a while, have you? Harvard asked. She shrugged. It's the only thing I'm good at. Well, this and blowjobs, but this makes more money. You're kidding. Less competition. That'll be $10. Harvard gave her the money and opened his newly acquired smokes. By now, a new girl had taken the stage and seemed to already be bored with her loveless marriage to the pole. Harvard's hands seemed to go on autopilot as they navigated the opening of the cigarette pack all on their own. He picked up the complimentary set of Fast Track matches and sat in the middle of the table and wondered why he didn't have his own lighter as he lit up the cigarette. Harvard had no idea how tense he was until every ounce of that tension melted away with the very first exhale of smoke. He sunk down into his chair and gazed up at the naked woman on the stage. She looked down at him with the general disregard one would have for a discarded ham sandwich one would be forced to step over when walking down the street. Harvard didn't care. Between the nicotine coursing through his system and her areola being the most enchanting shade of mocha, Harvard didn't care about a fucking thing at that moment. He almost didn't notice the beeping. It was an alarming and attention-demanding beep. There was no telling how long it had been going on before Harvard noticed, but once he did, he immediately realized it was coming from him. Harvard frantically frisked himself, searching for the source of the sound, moving himself as much as he could to try and triangulate which part of his body was making the noise. On one guess, he unbuttoned his cuffs and pulled down his sleeves, revealing exactly what he was looking for: an anti-nicotine patch attached to his left forearm. The words "nicotine detected" flashing in angry red letters. The butterflies in Harvard's stomach suddenly reappeared and rose up with such ferocity that it quickly occurred to him that this was not just butterflies. This time he was going to puke. Harvard lurched from his chair and stumbled out into the room until he found the sign to the men's room. He managed to dive into the stall just in time for the contents of his stomach to empty into the toilet. It must have been some time since his last meal, as the first ejection was followed by a long series of dry heaves. Harvard's stomach settled as quickly as it had turned, and he panted heavily with his face still in the toilet, terrified of looking up to see just how clean the floor he was kneeling on may or may not be. As he caught his breath, a soft, soothing voice suddenly called out from his forearm, "Thank you for using the Sirius anti-nicotine patch. When you're ready to quit, get serious." Harvard looked down at his arm just in time to see the words, "It has been 1 minute since my last cigarette," appear in soft blue letters. "You okay there, pal?" the bartender asked as Harvard staggered out of the men's room. "I'm fine," Harvard said, not looking at him. "I just quit smoking." "Right," the bartender said. "That makes perfect sense." Harvard couldn't tell if he's being sarcastic or not, so he just ignored him. "I need another beer," Harvard said to him, slumping into a chair at the bar. He desperately needed to get the taste of vomit out of his mouth. Even then, he wasn't sure how to get it out of his nostrils. The bartender put the beer in front of him. "You missed Starlight," he said. Of course I did, Harvard thought. It took me 10 minutes of trying to get this fucking thing off my arm before I remembered only a doctor could do that. "She coming back anytime soon?" he asked. "Sure," the bartender said, "but if you're looking for a private dance, now would be the time to ask." Harvard thought about it for a moment. Why not? He was here to find out who she was, after all. A little privacy would help with that. Why bother her while she's trying to work on stage when he could simply reserve her undivided attention for a few minutes, away from the prying eyes and ears of the random degenerates populating the main room? "Yeah," Harvard said, "that's a good idea." "I'll let her know. What's your name, pal?" "Harvard." The bartender stared at Harvard quietly for a moment. "Seriously? Just go get her, okay?" The bartender grimaced and disappeared through a door marked "Employees Only." Whew. I think I'm on the home stretch here. I just need to take a minute. Whew.
I'm over here. I muted myself just because I laugh a lot and I'm a very animated person. So like,
Okay, all right.
I'm sitting over here like you're bumping in on certain lines and descriptions, and I'm like, oh, he's such a better writer than me.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that.
Hit it, man. Hit it. Keep going.
All right, all right, all right. Whew. Harvard leaned forward and rested his forehead on the bar, the second beer rushing through his bloodstream and into his head, informing him of just how low his alcohol tolerance is. When I find out who I am, Harvard thought, I am going to make me pay dearly for this. "Booth 4, the bartender said. Harvard looked up. "Pardon?" "Booth 4, the bartender repeated, pointing to a row of private dance rooms lining the far wall. "She'll meet you in there in a minute." Harvard made his way over to the private booths, the eyes of all the other club patrons following him as he took very careful steps across the room. "What's wrong with you people?" he thought. "There's a naked woman on the stage. Stare at her, not me." He found his way inside booth number 4 and slumped down into the cushions, heaving a sigh of victory at having crossed a room without doing something stupid again. It began to dawn on him how ridiculous this all was. There was clearly a reason he took the Amnitol, and the first thing he did was start tracking down the life he went out of his way to forget. What kind of idiot does that? "Don't wear the pin," the only note to himself said. "You have no friends." The more Harvard thought about it, the more he hated himself. This isn't a vacation. This is a cruel fucking joke. Harvard shoved his hands into his pockets and rummaged around, looking for the Ambatol pin. Fuck this, he thought. I'm gonna put that goddamn pin on. Maybe then people would cut me a little fucking slack. After searching each pocket twice, Harvard remembered he'd thrown the pin and the amnitol away. While still stuck in the alleyway, he chucked them down the road in anger when he realized he was the kind of moron to do this to himself. Clearly, the discovery of his own stupidity did not help him be less stupid. Harvard may very well... Excuse me. Whew. Harvard may very well had launched into a tirade of expletive, possibly even torn apart some of the cushions and pillows at hand had he not been interrupted at that moment by a perfectly manicured set of fingers pulling back the curtain to the private booth. Harvard looked up at the face that looked back at him. Harvard looked up, and the face that looked back at him instantly calmed his nerves. He had seen her picture, but seeing her in person seemed to have a narcotic effect on him. Somewhere deep inside, he was more happy to see her than he thought possible. After all this trouble and humiliation, he was finally face to face with the girl he knew only as Starlight, and she was even more beautiful in person than Harvard had expected. He heaved a sigh of relief as he looked her up and down. The clothes she wore were clearly designed to be taken off, but he was less concerned for her body than he had been for the other girls. It was her face that Harvard kept turning his attention to. It was a face he knew. It was a face of someone who could tell him who he was and perhaps even why he would do this to himself. It was the face of an angel who had the power to make this crazy, stupid day make just a little bit of sense. Harvard was sure he was smiling like a fool at her, but didn't care. He genuinely wanted to be smiling right now, especially at this girl. Starlight's mouth opened wide and a blood-curdling scream erupted right in Harvard's face, slapping the smile right off it. "It's him! It's him!" Starlight screamed as she stumbled backwards. She lost her balance on the platform shoes and fell on her butt, but the screaming didn't stop. "Wait, calm down," Harvard yelled back at her, climbing to his feet and out of the booth. Get away from me," she screamed, kicking the giant shoes at him from the floor. "Wait, stop, I need to talk to you. I don't remember." Harvard's tongue tensed up and convulsed in place, along with the rest of him. He hit the floor with a thud and finally saw the very large security guards standing over him, their taser wands still crackling off the last few sparks of leftover voltage. They snuck up on me again, Harvard thought. I should be dead. That is the end of book 1.
I'm gonna assume that you meant chapter 1.
Well, it is, yeah, technically chapters. It's that wasn't the whole modus operandi book. It's, yeah. Like I said, when I first wrote it, it was serialized. So the chapters in this are referred to as books because they were first released in that way. So
okay, so like a collection, like an anthology.
Yes and no. It is one story, but it's more of a it's a trade paperback, like in the same way that
give us the blurb real quick, because we didn't do that for mine because mine's not written yet. But give us the blurb, and I'm curious because after what we just went through,
Thank you
what we just did. Well, okay, no. Right. First off, you and I just went through reading, we just did that. So I'm not talking me in the audience. All right, but how many? So with that much of a story put into your first chapter / book 1, how many chapters are in this book in total?
I want to say 9 or 10. I don't actually remember for sure.
Fair enough. Yeah. But that is a pretty solid glimpse. Mine has 36 chapters, so...
Your chapters are a lot shorter, though.
Yes, I noticed that. I noticed that it didn't take long for me to notice that. But damn, what you were saying, something that we were talking about, with the differences in our writing styles, where you were reading one of mine, a funeral, actually, at one point in my story. And you told me, it's why can't I just do what Brad did? And I'm sitting here only being a writer for 3 months going, haha. But no, you were telling me it takes 4 chapters or 4 paragraphs for your character to get out of bed. For me, my character never got out of bed. He's already out of bed. A huge difference.
Your characters don't sleep, yeah.
kind of like their writer.
Right.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
There were
Okay.
there were
I
a
appreciate
few
that.
there were a few key moments in there that I was, yeah, the laughter was pretty damn solid. The the descriptions of her little pink nipples,
No. Yeah. No. Yeah.
I was not ready. I was not ready for that. Like everything that had been discussed so far in the book, everything had been described. When that hit, that floored me, and I started laughing. I about died.
Okay. I'm glad you found it entertaining, because that's what, when I talk about how like I'm a different writer now and there are things about this that I'm embarrassed by, that's kind of one of those things, because it's one of those like, oh yeah, when I wrote this, I had been single for like 3 years. I was there was some issues there,
But the
what my
comedy
priorities
is
were.
still on point, though. Like, I maybe it's the shock value. I don't know. Like, I just
Maybe, yeah.
really wasn't ready for that. But it did get a hefty laugh out of me.
Good. I'm glad.
Well, we covered both the first chapter of my upcoming novel, which is entitled Ryuki's Way, and your book, which has been published for a while now. However, you are one of the worst people at marketing your own work that I have ever come across in my life. So please go check it out. Like, it's a good book. It's a good read. I remember reading, I thought I read the whole thing a while back, but there were parts that I don't know. I do not remember a lot of that first chapter. Either
that makes sense. It's been a while.
well, no, oh yeah, okay, that's that is fair. That was probably 10 years ago when I did read it, but still, I'm pretty decent about remembering what I read, not what I watch.
Okay.
No, I can watch the same thing for the first time like 3 times. Like, no, but reading doesn't usually go that way for me. Or maybe it was like what you were talking about, the difference between my story being read and my story being heard.
It's possible, yes. And I find that does tend to be a thing. You know, when you get the audiobook version of something, you do kind of get a different story, because those inflections and the character voice and stuff like that, you are getting the story told to you, as opposed to forming the story of your own mind with just the book as a prompt, essentially. So
now this goes back to what I was saying before about the fact I have to watch the movie first, then I have to read the book.
Okay, sure.
Because of things like that. Because
Gotcha.
it's
Okay.
just, it does help out a lot. I know their voices. I know what the house looks like. Things like it definitely aids in the imagination. It's not required. What I'm talking about here is specifically only if there's the book and the movie, and they're already out.
I can totally see what you're talking about. Yeah, I can see that. I'm trying to think, for me, like how often that's happened. Most of the time, I can think of 2 times in my life in which I can clearly remember comparing the book to the movie, and that
Well,
was...
how about this? After hour talk?
Okay, sure.
All right,
Hold
so
on.
we're not going to be on Facebook for the after hour. We're just going to kick that over. That's only on YouTube. But if you want to join us, we're over at the Hacksaw Workshop, live on YouTube every Thursday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. That's the thing that we aim for.
We were on Facebook this whole time? I didn't know that.
Like I said, I was pushing it out. I was advertising to more people, the posts like that. That's why when that's why when I got your message, like, I'm going to be late today, I'm like, this bitch is never late. Now? I know. Well, let's give that about a minute, and then we'll, what do you say, take about a 5-10 and then kick it over to the after hour, yeah?
Sounds good. Yes. Yep.
All right. We'll see you in the after hour, guys.
All right.